Trapped in a cruel marriage, she is forced to care for her husband's mistress and their son. Years later, she recognizes a necklace on a little girl that awakens an old familiar pain. Upon discovering the truth, she rises from the ashes, transforming her pain into strength and compassion. If this story grabs you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. The rain beat against the windows of the Upper East Side apartment as if trying to force its way in, but Marina barely heard the noise. Perched on the edge of the beige leather sofa, the one Eleanor had personally chosen because it complemented the imported marble in the living room, she kept her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. Richard stood with his back to her, admiring the view of the illuminated city through the glass. He always did that when he wanted to assert his superiority, as if the New York City skyline were an extension of his power. Marina knew every gesture, every calculated pause, every sigh he rehearsed before letting loose the words that would wound her. It had been almost 3 years of marriage, and she had learned to read the signs. When he crossed his arms like that, it meant something unpleasant was coming. When he tilted his head slightly to the side, it was because he wanted her to feel the weight of his contempt before the words were even spoken. I should have seen it from the beginning, she thought, pressing her fingers together until she felt the pressure in her bones. But the truth was, Marina hadn't wanted to believe it. She hadn't wanted to accept that the man she'd fallen for at that architecture conference 2 years before they married was capable of such coldness. Richard was charming, successful, the head of a development firm that bore his family's name. He had won her over with dinners at sophisticated restaurants on Fifth Avenue, with promises of a future where she could be happy by his side, where she wouldn't have to worry about anything but taking care of their home and the children they would have together. Children. The word still ached like a wound that would never heal. "Marina, you need to understand that my mother is right," Richard said at last, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. His voice was controlled, almost didactic, as if he were explaining something obvious to a stubborn child. "You can't keep acting like you're a victim. Things didn't work out because they weren't meant to. Sometimes nature knows what it's doing." She wanted to scream, to stand up and say it wasn't fair, that she had done everything right, followed every doctor's order, taken such gentle care of herself during those months as her belly grew slowly, timidly, as if the very life inside her was afraid to bloom. But Marina didn't scream. She never screamed. Instead, she just nodded, biting her lower lip to hold back the tears already welling in the corners of her eyes. Richard finally turned around. He wore an impeccably pressed light blue dress shirt and tailored slacks that accentuated his upright posture. Marina had always admired his elegance, the way he moved through the world with such confidence. Now, however, that same elegance seemed like armor he wore to shield himself from any trace of compassion. "I know this is hard for you," he continued, approaching and sitting in the armchair across from her, maintaining a calculated distance. "But you need to move on. My mother and I are trying to help you. That's why I agreed to let you stay here, even after everything. But now we have a delicate situation, and I need you to cooperate." Marina slowly raised her eyes. What did he want now? There was always something more, always a new demand, a new test to prove she should be grateful to still be part of this family that had never truly accepted her. "I have a client," Richard said, choosing his words carefully. "She's going through a difficult time. She just had a baby and doesn't have anyone to help her for the first few months. You know how it is. She needs someone who understands childcare, who knows how to handle these things. I thought it would be a good opportunity for you to keep busy, to get out of this sadness that's consuming you." Marina's heart hammered in her chest. Take care of a baby? Was he really asking this of her? Of all people, her, who had spent the last few months trying to recover from the pain of losing the daughter she had dreamed of. The little girl who should have been born, but who, according to the doctors, hadn't survived the complications of the pregnancy. "Richard, I don't know if I can," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course you can," he replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've always been strong, Marina. I know you can do this. Besides, it's not a request. It's a necessity." The firm is closing a huge deal with her husband, and I need to maintain a good relationship. You'll start tomorrow." Before she could argue, the apartment door opened and Eleanor swept in, with the authority of someone who feels she owns every space she enters. She was an elegant woman, her blonde hair always in a flawless bun, manicured nails, designer clothes, and a permanent expression of disapproval on her face. From day one, Eleanor had made it clear that Marina wasn't good enough for her son. She didn't have the right background, didn't come from an old New York family, didn't know how to behave in Manhattan's social circles. "Was Richard explaining about Jessica?" Eleanor asked, slipping her leather handbag off her shoulder and placing it carefully on the console table. Marina noticed the familiarity with which she said the name. Jessica, as if she'd known her for a long time, as if she were close to the family. "Yes, Mom. I was just explaining." Eleanor walked over to where Marina was sitting and stood directly in front of her, looking down at her in that way that always made Marina feel small and insignificant. "It's a chance for you to redeem yourself, dear, to show that you still have some use in this family. I know you're suffering, but life doesn't stop for a loss. Other women go through this and move on without all the drama." Marina clenched her hands tighter, feeling her nails dig into her palms. Other women. As if her pain were trivial, as if losing a daughter were just another obstacle anyone could overcome with a little willpower. "I'll do what you're asking," she said quietly, more out of exhaustion than agreement. "Perfect," Richard said, standing up and straightening his shirt. "I'll take you there tomorrow morning. Jessica lives on the Upper West Side. It's not too far. You'll stay there during the day taking care of the baby, helping with whatever's needed. It's a boy, by the way, born 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks. Marina did the math in her head. Her daughter would have been born almost 2 months ago if everything had gone right. She would be learning to hold her head up, to recognize her mother's voice, to smile in that special way only babies can. But there was none of that. There was only the emptiness, the crib that was never used, the little pink-painted nursery she had decorated with such love, now locked because Richard said it was better that way, that seeing it would only hurt her more. That night, Marina barely slept. She lay beside Richard, who snored peacefully, showing no sign of concern or empathy. She stared at the white ceiling, illuminated by the faint streetlights filtering through the gap in the curtains, and tried to mentally prepare herself for what the morning would bring. Caring for a stranger's child, pretending everything was fine, pretending it didn't hurt with every second, every breath. When the sun rose and the first rays began to creep into the room, Richard was already up, showering and getting ready for work. Marina got up slowly, put on a pair of faded jeans and a light-colored blouse, tied her brown hair into a simple ponytail, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Eleanor was already there, flipping through a design magazine and sipping a green juice that, according to her, was essential for maintaining youthful skin. "Are you ready?" her mother-in-law asked without looking up from the magazine. "Yes." "Good. Remember to be polite and helpful. Jessica is a very special woman to this family. Don't disappoint her." Marina just nodded, a tightness in her chest. There was something odd about that sentence, something she couldn't quite place, but that deeply unsettled her. Half an hour later, she was in the car with Richard, crossing the bustling streets of New York toward the Upper West Side. He didn't say a word the entire way, just scrolled through his phone, answering messages and making quick business calls. Marina stared out the window, watching the city pass in a blur of buildings, trees, and hurried people. Every traffic light, every corner, every coffee shop they passed seemed a reminder that life went on, indifferent to her pain. When they finally arrived at the building, a modern high-rise with a glass facade and an imposing doorman, Richard pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine. Before getting out, he turned to Marina and looked at her with an unexpected seriousness. "Marina, I need you to understand something. This woman is important to me. For business, I mean. So please behave yourself. Don't cause problems. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Just do what she asks, and everything will be fine." A shiver ran down her spine. There was something in his tone, in that emphasis, that didn't make sense. But she just agreed because that's what she always did. When they entered the apartment, Marina was greeted by a delicate-looking woman with dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders, fair skin, and green eyes that shone with a mix of exhaustion and caution. Jessica was wearing a beige silk robe and looked drained, yet she maintained an elegant, almost calculated posture. "So you're Marina," Jessica said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard has told me so much about you. Thank you for agreeing to help me. I know it's not easy, especially after everything you've been through." Marina's stomach churned. Richard had told her about losing their daughter? Why? What kind of relationship did this woman have with her husband that he would share such intimate information? "You don't have to thank me," Marina replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here to help in any way I can." Richard gave Jessica a quick kiss on the forehead, a brief but intimate gesture, and said his goodbyes. He didn't even glance at Marina before he left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed through the silent apartment. Marina stood there feeling completely out of place. Jessica led her to the living room, where a light wood crib was positioned near the window. Inside, a baby slept peacefully, wrapped in a light blue blanket. Marina approached slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. He was a beautiful boy, with rosy cheeks and long eyelashes. He was only a few days old, but he already had a serene, almost angelic expression. "His name is Lucas," Jessica said, standing beside Marina. "He's a calm baby, thank God. But I still need help. You know, it's my first time as a mother, and I'm learning everything as I go." Marina looked at her, trying to decipher what lay behind that speech. There was something in the way Jessica spoke, a certain artificiality, as if she were reciting a memorized script. And then Marina noticed something. On Jessica's wrist was a gold bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. The same bracelet Richard had given Marina for their anniversary years ago, the same one he'd said was custom-made, one of a kind. Marina's stomach twisted into a knot. It couldn't be. It couldn't be what she was thinking. But the more she looked at Jessica, the more she observed the details of the apartment, the more the pieces began to fit together in a way that made her sick. In the following days, Marina started noticing things, small, subtle things that, when pieced together, formed a disturbing picture. Richard called Jessica several times a day, always with excuses about the contract, the company, matters that supposedly needed urgent attention, but his tone of voice was different, softer, more attentive. The tone he used to use with Marina at the beginning of their relationship, before everything turned into this cold, calculated performance. One morning, while changing Lucas's diaper, Marina overheard Jessica on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low, but the apartment was small enough for fragments of the conversation to reach the living room. "Richard, I can't take this anymore. It's humiliating having her here every day. You promised this would be temporary. When are you going to deal with this once and for all?" Marina's blood ran cold. She froze, holding the clean diaper in midair, unable to move. The baby whimpered softly, but she barely heard him. I know, Jessica continued with an impatient sigh. "But your mother is insisting on this. She thinks it's the perfect way to keep everything under control. But I don't agree, Richard. It's not fair to me, it's not fair to Lucas, and it's definitely not fair to her, even if she doesn't know anything." Marina finished changing the baby with trembling hands. She placed Lucas gently back in the crib, making sure he was comfortable, then walked silently to the kitchen. Jessica had her back to the door, leaning against the counter, holding the phone to her ear. Marina stopped at the entrance, watching her. When Jessica finally hung up and turned around, she jumped slightly at the sight of Marina standing there, but quickly composed herself. "You scared me," she said with a forced smile. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Jessica averted her gaze, fiddling with a coffee cup on the counter. Marina noticed her hand was shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" Marina asked, her voice firmer than she expected. Yes, just a little tired. You know how it is, motherhood is exhausting." Marina nodded, but she didn't believe a word of it. She knew something was wrong, deeply wrong, and that she was being used in some way she couldn't yet fully comprehend. But the fear of facing the truth, of discovering something that could destroy what little was left of her life, kept her from asking the right questions. That night, when Richard picked her up to take her home, Marina couldn't look at him. She sat in silence in the passenger seat, her hands clasped in her lap, her mind reeling from everything she had seen and heard that day. "You're too quiet," Richard commented, without taking his eyes off the road. "Something wrong?" "No, just tired." He didn't press. He never did. And Marina knew that deep down he preferred it that way. The less she spoke, the fewer questions she asked. The easier it would be to keep whatever secret he was hiding. When they got home, Eleanor was in the living room, watching a soap opera on TV. She barely glanced at Marina as she walked in, just made a vague gesture with her hand, and said there was dinner in the fridge if she wanted to heat it up. Marina didn't. She went straight upstairs to the bedroom, locked the door, and threw herself onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow. That's when the tears came. Silent, desperate tears, heavy with a pain she no longer knew how to bear. Marina cried for the daughter she had lost, for the marriage that was never what she dreamed of, for the dignity that was being stolen from her, piece by piece, day after day, without her knowing how to fight back. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a journey that would take her to rock bottom, but that would also eventually teach her that even in the deepest darkness, there is a spark of light waiting to be found. And that light had a name she didn't yet know, but that already existed somewhere in the city, kept like a precious secret, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. That night, as Marina finally drifted off to sleep from exhaustion, she didn't know that life was about to show her that not everything that seems lost is truly gone, that some stories, no matter how painful, still have unwritten chapters, and that destiny sometimes has a very peculiar way of righting the cruelest injustices. The weeks passed, and Marina's routine became a cycle of silent humiliations. Every day, Richard would drop her off at Jessica's apartment in the morning and pick her up in the late afternoon, as if she were just another employee finishing her shift. And in fact, that's exactly how Marina began to feel. An employee, a housekeeper hired to serve without question, without complaint, without existing beyond the tasks assigned to her. Jessica no longer hid her contempt. At first, there had been a certain false cordiality, a veneer of politeness covering her true intentions. But as the days went by, that mask slipped, and Marina found herself facing a woman who openly despised her, who saw her as a threat or worse, as something too insignificant to deserve any respect. "Marina, Lucas needs a bath," Jessica would order, without even looking up from her phone, where she spent hours scrolling through social media feeds. "And then tidy up the kitchen, please. It's a mess." Marina obeyed. She always obeyed. She would carefully pick up the baby, take him to the bathroom, and bathe him with a gentleness that came from a deep place within her, a place where there was still love to give, even if it wasn't for the child she had dreamed of having. Lucas was innocent in all of this. It wasn't his fault he was born into a web of lies and betrayal. He was just a baby who needed care, and Marina, despite all her pain, couldn't bring herself to neglect him. But there were moments when the situation became unbearable. One afternoon, while Marina was folding Lucas's clothes in the living room, Eleanor showed up at the apartment unannounced. She walked in as if she owned the place, greeted Jessica with an affectionate hug, and then looked at Marina with that familiar expression, a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. "Still here, Marina?" Eleanor asked, taking off her sunglasses and placing them on her head. "I thought you'd be done with your work for today." "I'm just finishing up," Marina replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Good, because Jessica and I need to discuss some private matters. Family matters, you know." Marina felt the words like a slap in the face. Family matters. As if Jessica were part of the family, and she, Marina, Richard's legal wife, were nothing more than an intruder. Eleanor sat on the sofa next to Jessica, and they began to talk in low voices, but not so low that Marina couldn't catch a few fragments. They talked about Richard, about plans for the future, about how everything was falling into place perfectly. Marina pretended to be focused on the baby clothes, but every word was like a needle piercing her chest. "You did the right thing, dear," Eleanor said, holding Jessica's hand. "I know it wasn't easy, but now you have what you deserve. And Lucas, my goodness, he's perfect. Just like his father." Jessica smiled, a genuine smile Marina had never seen before. "Thank you, Eleanor. Having you on my side makes all the difference. I know the situation is complicated, but I'm sure it will all be resolved soon." It will all be resolved soon. What exactly did that mean? A chill ran down Marina's spine. She wasn't stupid. The pieces were fitting together more and more clearly, more and more painfully. Richard and Jessica weren't just business associates, they were lovers. And Lucas, the baby she cared for every day with such tenderness, was Richard's son. The discovery should have destroyed her completely, and in a way it did. But it also ignited something inside her that had been dormant for a long time. A small spark of indignation, of rebellion, of the will not to let herself be completely annihilated. That night when Richard drove her home, Marina finally gathered the courage to confront him. They were stopped at a light on Park Avenue when she said, her voice trying to stay firm but trembling at the edges, "Richard, who is Jessica, really?" He didn't turn to look at her. He just kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hands on the steering wheel, his expression unreadable. "I already told you. She's a client. Don't lie to me. Please." The light turned green, and Richard accelerated, the city lights blurring past the window. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a coldness Marina never thought possible, he answered, "Do you really want to know, Marina? Do you really want me to be honest with you?" "Yes." Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. "Fine. Jessica is someone I love, someone who understands me, who isn't a constant disappointment like you. And Lucas is my son. My real son. The son you could never give me." The words fell on Marina like an avalanche. She knew, deep down she already knew, but hearing it, said with such cruelty, such indifference, was devastating. She shrank into the car seat, hugging herself as if trying to shield herself from a physical blow. "Why did you make me take care of him?" she asked, her voice broken. "Why did you put me through this?" "Because my mother thought it would be a good idea. She said you needed to learn your place in this family. And you know what, Marina? She was right. You're bad luck. Everything you touch turns to tragedy. So it's better if you stay away from what's mine." Bad luck. The words echoed in Marina's mind for days. Bad luck. As if losing her daughter was her fault, as if she had chosen that pain, that emptiness that consumed her from the inside. After that night, everything got worse. Marina continued to go to Jessica's apartment, not because she wanted to, but because she had nowhere else to go. She had no family in New York. Her parents had passed away years ago in a car accident, and her only brother, Thomas, was living abroad, working for a tech company. She had tried calling him a few times, but it always went to, voicemail. Thomas was too busy with his own life to worry about his sister's problems. At Jessica's apartment, the humiliations intensified. Jessica began to treat her openly like a maid, giving orders in a tone that left no room for argument. "Marina, don't touch Lucas's clothes with those hands. You didn't wash them properly. In fact, it's better if you don't touch his things at all without asking permission. You're bad luck, and I don't want that negative energy affecting my son. Marina, don't get so close to the crib. You might bring him bad luck. Marina, don't sit on that sofa. It's new, and I don't want you to ruin it." Every order, every prohibition, every disdainful glance was like another stone placed on Marina's shoulders until she could barely stand under the weight of so much humiliation. But the worst was yet to come. On a hot afternoon in November, Eleanor showed up at the apartment again, this time with two friends, high society women from her social circle. They walked in laughing, carrying shopping bags from designer stores, chatting about a lunch they'd had at a famous restaurant in Soho. "Look at this," Eleanor said, pointing to Marina, who was washing dishes in the kitchen. "This is Marina, my son's wife, or rather the ex-wife who hasn't gotten the hint yet." The friends laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that made Marina want to disappear. "Poor thing," one of them commented, a woman with platinum blonde hair and excessive jewelry. Still clinging to what's already gone, it's sad to see someone with no self-respect. Marina felt tears burn in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not there. Not in front of these women who reveled in others' suffering as if it were an afternoon's entertainment. When they finally left, Jessica approached Marina in the kitchen. For a brief moment, Marina thought there might be a flicker of compassion, a word of comfort. But what came was the opposite. "You heard what they said, Marina. You need to accept reality. Richard doesn't want you anymore. He never really did. You were just a convenience, someone he thought he could control. But now he has me, and I'm everything you could never be." Marina squeezed the sponge so hard that she felt the water run between her fingers. She wanted to scream, to throw everything down and walk out, but fear paralyzed her. Fear of being completely alone, fear of having nowhere to go, fear of losing herself completely. But then something unexpected happened. It was a Friday afternoon, and Marina was packing up to leave when Jessica got a call. She answered cheerfully, her voice full of anticipation. "Hi, honey, yes, I'm ready. You can come pick me up. Oh, you're going to love the dress I bought for tonight. It's perfect for the event." Marina froze. What event? Jessica hung up and turned to her with a smug smile. "Richard and I are going to a charity gala tonight. It's at the Avalon Hotel, you know, the one with the red rooftop pool. There's going to be an auction, performances. All of Manhattan's elite will be there. But of course, you have no idea what I'm talking about." Marina didn't answer. She just grabbed her bag and waited for Richard to arrive to take her home. But when he finally showed up, wearing a flawless suit and exuding expensive cologne, he barely looked at Marina. "You can grab a cab home," he said with casual indifference. "I have to take Jessica to an engagement." Marina left the apartment with her legs shaking and her heart in pieces. She waited on the sidewalk until she could hail a cab, and during the entire ride home, she stared out the window without really seeing anything. Her mind was blank, unable to process any more pain, any more humiliation. When she arrived at the Upper East Side apartment, the house was empty. Eleanor had left a note on the kitchen table saying she was spending the weekend at a friend's house in the Hamptons. Marina was alone, completely alone. She walked to the room she had prepared for her daughter, the pink nursery that had been locked for months. For the first time since the loss, she gathered the courage to go inside. The key was hidden in the dresser drawer in the master bedroom, and Marina retrieved it with trembling hands. When she opened the door, the smell of fresh paint still lingered. The white crib was assembled in a corner, covered with a sheet to protect it from dust. The walls had drawings of clouds and little stars that Marina had painted by hand, imagining her daughter growing up there, looking at that artificial sky before falling asleep. Each night, Marina sat on the floor, leaned her back against the wall and cried. She cried for everything she had lost, for everything that had been taken from her, for everything she had allowed them to do to her. She cried until she had no tears left, until her chest felt hollow and her eyes were swollen. That's when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Marina hesitated, but finally answered. "Hello? Marina?" The voice on the other end was male, familiar, but different, more mature, more serious. "Marina? Thomas?" "Yes, it's me. Marina. I'm in New York. I just landed. We need to talk. Where are you?" Marina could hardly believe it. Thomas was back? After so long without a word, right now? "I'm at home, on the Upper East Side. I'm on my way. Don't go anywhere, please. I have important things to tell you." Marina hung up the phone in a state of shock. She didn't know whether to feel hope or fear. Thomas had always been protective, had always looked out for her when they were younger. But he had drifted away, built his own life, far from the US, far from their family. Problems. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Marina opened the door, and there he was. Thomas was taller than she remembered, his dark hair combed back, a well-groomed beard, his brown eyes full of determination. He wore a leather jacket and carried a small suitcase. "Marina," he said, and before she could say anything, he pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry it took me so long to come back." Marina fell apart in her brother's arms. All the emotions she had held back for so long finally found a safe release. She cried, like she hadn't cried since she was a child, and Thomas just held her, letting her pour it all out. When they finally went inside and sat in the living room, Thomas looked around with a disapproving expression. "This place looks like a mausoleum. Where's Richard? And my dear former mother-in-law?" Marina told him everything. Every detail, every humiliation, every moment of pain. Thomas listened in silence, but she could see the anger building in his eyes with every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a low voice filled with determination, he said, "Marina, I came to New York because I got an offer to take over as CEO of the family's corporate group, the one our parents founded years ago that's been under third-party management since they passed. I had no idea you were going through all this. But now that I know, I'm going to do everything in my power to get you out of this situation." Marina looked at her brother with a mix of hope and disbelief. How could he help her? Richard was powerful. Eleanor had connections all over New York. Jessica was solidifying her position as the new lady of the family. "Thomas, I don't know if you can do anything. I'm trapped. I have nowhere to go, no money, nothing. You have me. And you have more than you think, Marina. But first, we're going to do something. Tomorrow night, there's a charity gala at the Avalon Hotel. I'm taking you." Marina's stomach churned. It was the same event Richard and Jessica were going to. "Thomas, I can't go there. They'll be there." "Exactly. And that's why you're going. Because it's time for you to stop hiding, to stop accepting being treated like nothing. You're going to walk into that event with your head held high by my side, and you're going to show all those people that you still exist, that you still matter." Marina wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe there was a way out of the dark hole she had fallen into. But the fear was still too great, the pain still too raw. Thomas sensed her hesitation and took her hand firmly. "I promise, Marina. I will help you get back everything they took from you. But you have to trust me. Just this once. Trust me." And for the first time in a long time, Marina felt a tiny spark of hope ignite within her. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. The night of the charity gala arrived faster than Marina had expected. Thomas had insisted she dress the part, so in the morning he took her to a chic boutique on Madison Avenue. The saleswoman, a friendly middle-aged woman, helped Marina choose a navy blue dress that highlighted her brown eyes and fit her slender frame perfectly. Heels, a discreet clutch, and a few accessories completed the look. When Marina looked at herself in the dressing room mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. It had been so long since she'd taken care of herself, so long since she'd felt worthy of any kind of attention or care. But there, in that elegant dress, with her hair down in soft waves over her shoulders, she saw a glimpse of the person she used to be before everything fell apart. "You look beautiful," Thomas said when she came out of the dressing room. Marina felt her eyes well up, but managed to hold back the tears. She didn't want to ruin the makeup the saleswoman had kindly applied. That evening, when the car Thomas had rented pulled up in front of the Avalon Hotel, Marina's stomach twisted into knots. The ship-shaped building, illuminated against the dark New York sky, was impressive, but all that grandeur only intensified her nervousness. She knew Richard and Jessica would be inside, probably already flaunting themselves as a couple, without any shame or remorse. "Breathe," Thomas said, taking her hand before they got out of the car. "You're not alone. I'm here." They entered the main ballroom where the event was taking place. It was a vast, luxurious space with crystal chandeliers, tables decorated, with elaborate floral arrangements, and waiters circulating with trays of champagne and canapes. Manhattan's elite were all there, women in designer gowns, men in impeccable suits, all talking and laughing, creating the characteristic buzz of a high society event. Marina scanned the room, and it didn't take long to find them. Richard and Jessica were near the bar, she in a tight, attention-grabbing red dress, he beside her with a possessive hand on her back. They were talking to a group of people and looked completely at ease, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marina felt a pang of pain in her chest, but Thomas gently pulled her in the opposite direction. "It's not worth looking at them now. Come on, let's find our seats." They sat at a table near the stage, where there would be artistic performances throughout the evening. Dinner was served, elaborate dishes Marina could barely touch. Her stomach was tight with anxiety. She tried to focus on the conversation Thomas was having with the people at their table, business leaders and executives who seemed to know him well, but her mind was elsewhere. Then the lights dimmed and a voice announced, "A special performance." Marina looked at the stage and saw a group of children climbing the steps. They were boys and girls of various ages, all wearing white children's choir uniforms. An older woman, likely the conductor, stood before them with a warm smile. "Tonight," the announcer said, "we are pleased to welcome the Hope Choir, made up of children from shelters and orphanages across New York City. They have prepared a very special performance for all of us." The audience applauded politely. Marina shifted in her chair, trying to show interest, but her mind was still torn between the pain of seeing Richard and Jessica and the surreal feeling of being there, at an event so far removed from the reality she had been living. And then, something happened. The music began. It was a soft, melodic song, sung by children's voices that echoed through the ballroom. Marina was staring at her plate when one voice stood out from the rest. It was a girl's voice, clear and crystalline, filled with an emotion that seemed impossible for someone so young. Marina instinctively looked up. In the center of the stage, slightly ahead of the other children, was a girl of about 5. She had dark brown hair in 2 braids, fair skin, rosy cheeks and eyes. Those eyes. Marina felt the air leave her lungs. They were almond-shaped brown eyes, with a particular sparkle, an expression she knew from some deep, inexplicable place. She leaned forward, her heart racing. The girl sang with her eyes closed, completely lost in the music, and there was something about her, something in the way she moved her lips, the way she tilted her head slightly, that made Marina feel a connection she couldn't explain. And then she saw it. Around the girl's neck on a thin chain was a small pendant, a silver heart with a blue stone in the center. Marina knew that pendant. She had bought it herself years ago when she found out she was pregnant. It was a gift she planned to give her daughter when she was born, a symbol of the love she already felt before even seeing her. She had left that pendant with her daughter at the hospital. In the last moment before everything went wrong, before the complications, before they told her the baby hadn't survived, Marina had asked the nurse to place the pendant in the crib as a way to protect her daughter, to leave a part of herself there. But her daughter was gone, or so they had told her. Marina felt the world spin, her vision blurred, and she had to grip the table to keep from fainting. "Marina, what is it?" Thomas asked, concerned. "That girl," she whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. "That girl in the center. Do you see the pendant she's wearing?" Thomas looked at the stage, frowning. "I do. It's a heart, right? It's the pendant I left with my daughter at the hospital." "Thomas, it's the same one, I'm absolutely sure." Thomas looked at his sister with disbelief. "Marina, that's not possible. Your daughter, she didn't make it. The doctors confirmed it. I know what they told me, but look at her, Thomas. Look at that girl and tell me you don't see a resemblance." Thomas looked back at the stage. The girl had opened her eyes and was still singing, now with a shy smile on her lips. He was silent for a moment, and Marina saw something change in his expression. "Her eyes," Thomas murmured, "they look like Mom's." Marina felt tears stream down her face. She didn't try to stop them. She couldn't have, even if she wanted to. Something inside her, something primal and inexplicable, was screaming that this girl was her daughter. It made no sense. It contradicted everything she'd been told, but a mother's heart doesn't lie. The performance ended to warm applause. The children came down from the stage and were led to a side area of the ballroom for a snack before returning to their shelters. Marina didn't hesitate. She stood up, ignoring the curious glances from those around her, and walked toward that corner of the room. "Marina, wait," Thomas called, getting up to follow her. When she reached the group of children, the choir coordinator was talking to some of them, handing out sandwiches and juice boxes. Marina approached slowly, her heart hammering, her eyes fixed on the little girl who was now sitting in a chair, swinging her legs and nibbling on a piece of cake. "Excuse me," Marina said to the coordinator, a kind-faced woman with grey hair. "The performance was beautiful. The children sing wonderfully." "Thank you, dear. We were so happy to be invited here tonight. It's an Incredible opportunity for them. Marina looked at the girl again. Up close, the sense of connection was even stronger. "May I ask a question? That little girl there, the one in the center, what's her name?" "That's Sophia. She's one of our most talented. She's only 5, but she already sings like an angel." Sophia. The name echoed in Marina's mind like a revelation. It was the name she had chosen for her daughter, the name she had whispered so many times during her pregnancy, the name she never got to say officially because the girl, they told her, hadn't survived long enough to be registered. "Which shelter is she from?" Marina asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mother Teresa's home in the Bronx. Sophia's been there since she was a baby. She was found shortly after birth and brought to us. We don't know anything about her biological family." Marina felt her legs give way. Thomas reached her side and grabbed her arm, keeping her from falling. "My sister isn't feeling well," he said to the coordinator. "Could we sit here for a moment?" Of course. Let me get you a glass of water." As the coordinator walked away, Marina couldn't take her eyes off Sophia. The girl had finished her cake and was now looking around curiously. Her eyes met Marina's, and for an instant, just an instant, something passed between them. A spark of recognition, a connection that transcended any logical explanation. Sophia smiled at Marina, an innocent, pure smile, and then turned her attention back to the other children. "Marina, you need to calm down," Thomas said in a low voice. "I know this is intense, but we need to investigate this properly before jumping to any conclusions." "I know it's her, Thomas. I know it in the depths of my soul. That pendant, that name, those eyes, it can't be a coincidence." "All right, then we'll do this the right way. We'll find out the truth, but calmly. I know people who can help us." The coordinator returned with a glass of water, which Marina drank in small sips, trying to compose herself. They talked for a few more minutes, Marina asking subtle questions about Sophia, about the shelter's routine, about how the children ended up there. Each answer was another piece of the puzzle forming in her mind. When they finally said their goodbyes and returned to their table, Marina was shaking. Thomas made her sit and held her hands firmly. "We are going to find out the truth. I promise." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Marina barely registered when Richard and Jessica walked past their table and stopped, surprised to see her there. Richard frowned, visibly annoyed, while Jessica looked at her with a mix of contempt and curiosity. "Marina," Richard said, forcing a casual tone, "I didn't know you'd be here." Thomas stood up, extending his hand with cold politeness. "Richard, it's been a while." Richard hesitated before shaking his hand. "Thomas, I heard you were back in New York." "I am, and with some very interesting plans." Richard looked uncomfortable but tried to hide it. Marina noticed Jessica gently tugging on his arm, wanting him to move away from the awkward situation. "We'll see you later," Richard said hastily, and the two of them walked away. Marina didn't care. Her mind was completely focused on Sophia, on the impossible possibility that now seemed increasingly real. In the following days, Thomas put a meticulous plan into action. He hired a private investigator, a discreet and competent man who had worked on complex cases of fraud and document forgery. The investigator began digging through the records of the hospital where Marina had given birth, the orphanage's files, any clue that could connect the dots. Meanwhile, Thomas also began to officially take over as CEO of the family's corporate group. During the transition, he discovered something disturbing. Documents had been tampered with. Contracts had been signed in Marina's name without her knowledge. Richard had used his position as her husband to manipulate paperwork, trying to erase her from the company's system while inserting the name of Lucas, his son with Jessica, as the presumed heir. "This is fraud," Thomas told Marina one night as they reviewed the documents spread across the dining table. "He forged your signature, Marina, and he tried to cut you out of the inheritance our parents left completely." Marina stared at the papers with a mixture of shock and anger. She knew Richard was capable of many things, but this was a level of malice she hadn't imagined. "What can we do?" "We can sue him, void all these fraudulent contracts, and more importantly, we can get back what's rightfully yours." While Thomas handled the legal side, the investigator brought news. He had found a former nurse from the hospital, a woman named Mrs. Teresa who had retired 2 years ago. She agreed to meet with Marina at a discreet coffee shop in the West Village. Marina arrived at the meeting with her heart racing. Mrs. Teresa was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair, a face lined by time but with kind, expressive eyes. She ordered a coffee and sat in silence for a moment before she began to speak. "I remember you," she said, looking at Marina with a mix of sadness and compassion. "I was on duty the night you gave birth. It was a complicated night, full of emergencies." "What happened?" Marina asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Teresa took a deep breath. "Your daughter was born with a rare condition. They call it uterine hibernation. It's when a baby enters a state of extremely low metabolism. The vital signs are so faint they can be mistaken for a lack of life. That night it was chaotic. The medical team was dealing with multiple emergencies, and your daughter was given no chance, but I noticed something. She was still breathing, very faintly, but she was. Marina felt the world collapse and rebuild itself all at once. So she was alive. She was. But when I tried to alert the doctors, I was stopped by one of the hospital administrators. He said a decision had been made, and I shouldn't interfere. I later found out there was money involved, pressure from influential people to have that baby declared deceased." "Richard," Marina whispered, feeling bile rise in her throat. Mrs. Teresa nodded. "I didn't have concrete proof, but I suspected, so I made a decision. That night, after everyone had left, I took the baby and brought her to an orphanage I knew, a safe place far from the hospital, where no one would look for her. I left the pendant that was in her crib with her, so that one day, if there was any justice, it could serve as proof." Marina couldn't hold back her tears. She wept openly, right there in the coffee shop, not caring about the curious glances from others. Thomas, who had accompanied his sister, held her hand tightly, his own eyes glistening. "Mrs. Teresa, you saved my daughter." The nurse smiled sadly. "I did what I thought was right, but I'm so sorry I couldn't do more. I'm so sorry you went through all that pain believing your daughter was lost." Marina squeezed the woman's hand. "You did more than anyone could have ever expected, and I will be eternally grateful." With Mrs. Teresa's documented testimony and the evidence of the pendant, Thomas contacted a lawyer specializing in family law. They filed for a DNA test, which was carried out discreetly with a court order. The results would take a few weeks, but Marina already knew the truth in her heart. Sophia was her daughter. She was alive. She had grown up without her, but she was alive. The weeks that followed were the most intense of Marina's life. Each day brought a new revelation, another piece of the puzzle falling into place, exposing the extent of the manipulation that had been carefully orchestrated against her. Thomas worked tirelessly with the lawyers, dismantling every document, every contract, the entire structure of lies Richard had built. The DNA test results arrived on a rainy December morning. Marina was in the living room of the new apartment Thomas had rented for her, far from the home she had shared with Richard, far from the painful memories. When the lawyer called with the news, she already knew what he would say, but hearing the words still made her legs weak. "Marina, the results are positive. Sophia is your biological daughter. 99.9% match, there is no doubt." Marina covered her face with her hands and collapsed onto the sofa. Thomas, who was beside her, held her as she cried out all the tears she had stored away. They weren't just tears of relief or happiness, they were tears for all the lost years, for all the birthdays she couldn't celebrate with her daughter, for all the nights Sophia fell asleep, not knowing she had a mother who loved her more than anything in the world. But with the pain came a fierce determination. Marina would not let another day pass without fighting for her daughter. The legal proceedings unfolded quickly. With Mrs. Teresa's testimony, the fraudulent documents discovered by Thomas, and now the DNA proof, the case against Richard and Eleanor became increasingly solid. The lawyer filed multiple lawsuits for the annulment of the fraudulent contracts, the restitution of Marina's rights to the family company, and for full custody of Sophia. The news spread like wildfire through Manhattan's high society. Richard tried to do damage control, hiring the best lawyers money could buy, but the evidence was irrefutable. He had forged documents, manipulated hospital records through bribery, and worst of all had allowed his own wife to believe her daughter was dead, while the child grew up in an orphanage. Marina would never forget the day of the preliminary hearing. It was in a discreet room at the New York Criminal Courthouse. She walked in with Thomas by her side, wearing a sober but elegant suit. Across the room, Richard sat next to his lawyers, his face pale, his posture rigid. Jessica wasn't there, but Eleanor was. Her former mother-in-law wore sunglasses indoors, trying to hide her face, but Marina could see the lines of tension around her mouth. During the hearing, when the judge questioned Richard about the document fraud, he tried to defend himself by claiming he had acted in the company's best interest, that Marina was emotionally unstable and unfit to make financial decisions. That's when Thomas stood up with the judge's permission and presented a series of emails and recordings that proved the opposite. Richard had deliberately isolated Marina, manipulated her emotional vulnerability, and used his position of power to benefit himself and Jessica. "What you have done, sir," the judge said with a severity that made even Richard's lawyers shrink in their seats, "goes far beyond corporate misconduct. You have committed fraud, embezzlement, and worse, you contributed to a mother believing her child had died. This court will treat this case with the gravity it deserves." Richard left the courthouse visibly shaken. Marina watched as he was swarmed by reporters outside, all shouting questions about the scandal. She felt no pleasure in seeing the man she once loved publicly humiliated. She just felt a strange emptiness, as if she were watching someone else's story. While the criminal and civil cases against Richard moved forward, Marina focused all her energy on preparing for her official reunion with Sophia. The adoption process, in this case technically a restitution of custody, was being fast-tracked due to the exceptional circumstances. The social worker assigned to the case visited Marina several times, assessing the conditions of the new apartment, talking at length about Marina's plans for the future. "You understand," the social worker said, a woman with a gentle voice and an attentive gaze, "that Sophia has spent the first 5 years of her life not knowing the truth about her origins. She believes she has no family. The transition needs to be careful, gradual. We can't just tell a 5-year-old that everything she knew was a lie." "I understand," Marina replied, her voice firm despite the tightness in her chest. "I will do everything the right way. I've waited 5 years. I can wait as long as it takes for her to feel safe and loved." Supervised meetings were arranged. The first took place at the orphanage itself, in a playroom filled with toys. Marina arrived with trembling hands, her heart pounding. When Sophia entered the room, accompanied by the coordinator, the little girl looked at Marina with curiosity, but no immediate recognition. "Sophia, do you remember the lady from the hotel event?" the coordinator asked gently. "She would like to talk with you if you don't mind." Sophia nodded, a shy dip of her head, and approached slowly. Marina knelt to be at the girl's level, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overflow. "Hi, Sophia. My name is Marina. I really loved hearing you sing." The girl smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, I like singing." "I know. And you sing so well. Do you like other things too? Drawing? Playing?" Sophia began to talk, shyly at first, but then with more confidence. She told Marina about her friends at the orphanage, about the music classes she had twice a week, about a storybook she loved. Marina listened to every word as if it were the most precious thing in the world, memorizing every detail, every expression, every gesture of the daughter she had lost and was now miraculously getting back. The meetings became more frequent. Marina brought books, toys, and did activities with Sophia. Slowly, a bond began to form. Sophia looked forward to Marina's visits, and Marina lived for those moments. It was during their 4th meeting that Sophia, while drawing next to Marina, asked a question that broke her heart. "Marina, do you have kids?" Marina's throat tightened. She glanced at the social worker, who was observing discreetly from a corner of the room. The woman gave a gentle nod, a silent permission for Marina to begin planting the seeds of truth. "Yes, I do, Sophia. I have a daughter." "Oh, really? Is she my age?" "Yes, she's exactly your age." Sophia continued drawing, but Marina could tell she was processing the information. Then, with the brutal innocence of a child, Sophia asked, "Why didn't you bring her here to play with me?" Marina took a deep breath, feeling tears well up. "Because I spent a very long time looking for her. But now I've found her. And you know what? She has eyes just like mine." Sophia stopped drawing and looked up at Marina. Then she looked at her own reflection in the nearby window, studying her. Brown eyes. When she looked back at Marina, there was something different in her face, an understanding that shouldn't exist in a child so young, but that sometimes emerges when souls recognize truths the mind cannot yet fully process. The following month, full custody was granted. Sophia was told gradually and carefully about her true origins. The news was devastating for the little girl, who cried for hours trying to understand how something like this could have happened. But Marina was there holding her, promising they would never be separated again, that from that day forward they would write a new story together. As Marina rebuilt her relationship with Sophia, the legal fallout continued. Thomas officially took over as CEO of the family's corporate conglomerate, nullifying all the fraudulent contracts Richard had forged. The company was in a precarious financial state due to mismanagement, but Thomas was competent and visionary. He began implementing changes, cutting unnecessary expenses, forging strategic partnerships, and, most importantly, clearing the family's name. Marina, now with her rights to her shares in the company restored, decided to use her new position to create something meaningful. With Thomas's support, she founded the Phoenix Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting women who were victims of emotional manipulation and abandonment in the postpartum period. The institute offered psychological counseling, legal guidance, and financial support to mothers going through situations similar to what she had endured. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women reached out, sharing stories of abuse, manipulation, and injustice. Marina realized that her pain, as devastating as it had been, was not unique. There was an entire universe of silenced, diminished women prevented from experiencing their motherhood with dignity. Meanwhile, Jessica began to realize she had been just a pawn in Richard's power game. When the fraudulent contracts were voided, and it became clear that Lucas had no right to the inheritance Richard had promised, she understood she had been used. One afternoon, she showed up at Marina's office unannounced. The two women looked at each other for a long moment. Jessica was different, her face bare of elaborate makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her eyes red from crying. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," Jessica said, her voice hoarse. "I know I don't deserve it. But I came to say that I didn't know about your daughter. I didn't know he had forged documents. Richard told me you were getting a divorce, that it was all consensual. I was stupid to believe him." Marina remained silent, studying the woman before her. Part of her wanted to feel anger, even hatred, but all she could feel was a deep sadness for all the lives that had been shattered by one man's ambition. "Jessica, what's done is done. I can't say I forgive you because that would be a lie. But I can say that I won't waste any more energy hating you. You and Lucas are not my enemies. Richard made victims of us all, each in our own way." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. She turned to leave, but before opening the door, she looked at Marina one last time. "He's devastated, you know. Richard. He lost everything. The company, the respect, his friends. He's living in a tiny apartment in Newark, working for some second-rate law firm. But I think the worst part for him is his conscience. He calls me sometimes in the middle of the night crying, saying he can't sleep." Marina didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Richard had made his choices and was now living with the consequences. She took no pleasure in his suffering, but she felt no compassion either. Jessica left, and Marina never saw her again. She heard months later that she had left New York, moved upstate with Lucas to start a new life, far from everything that reminded her of that dark period. And then came the moment no one expected. Eleanor, the mother-in-law, who had been one of Marina's greatest oppressors, had a nervous breakdown. She was rushed to a private hospital, where she was admitted to the psychiatric ward for nearly a month. When she was discharged, she was visibly changed. Her once impeccable hair was grey and unkempt. Her face, once always made up, was bare and marked by deep lines of suffering. She asked to speak with Marina. Thomas was vehemently against it, but Marina, moved by a curiosity she couldn't quite understand, agreed. They met at a quiet cafe in the West Village. Eleanor arrived leaning on a cane, her eyes downcast, her posture stooped. When she finally sat across from Marina, she was silent for a long moment before speaking. "During my time in the hospital," Eleanor said, her voice weak and trembling, "I had visions or delusions perhaps. I can't tell the difference anymore, but I saw a little girl, a girl with brown eyes who looked at me and asked why I had taken her away from her family. Marina, I saw your daughter. I saw Sophia." A shiver ran down Marina's spine. "And then I understood," Eleanor continued, tears streaming down her face, "that I had become a monster, that I had allowed my son to become a monster, all for pride, for fear that our family would lose status, power. I convinced Richard to do that to you. It was my idea to have your daughter declared deceased. I planned the whole thing." Marina's stomach churned. She had suspected, but hearing the confirmation was devastating. "Why?" was all she could ask. Eleanor buried her face in her hands. "Because I didn't think you were good enough. Because I wanted Richard to have a child with someone from our social circle, someone who could ensure the continuation of our name with the dignity I thought was necessary. But I was wrong, terribly wrong, and now I live with this guilt that consumes me every second." Marina looked at the broken woman before her. Part of her wanted to get up and walk away without a word, but another part, a part she didn't even know she had, felt something close to compassion. "Eleanor, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you completely, but I know that holding on to hatred won't heal anything, so I'll tell you this. You will have to learn to live with what you've done, and if there is any redemption possible for you, it will come from yourself, from your own actions from now on, not from me." Eleanor nodded, thanking her between sobs, and they parted ways. Marina later learned that her former mother-in-law had donated a large portion of her fortune to charity and was living a reclusive life, with no contact with her son, dedicating her days to volunteer work at shelters. The months turned into a year. Sophia adapted to her new life with impressive resilience. She and Marina developed a loving routine, full of small rituals that brought them closer each day. Marina enrolled her daughter in a private school where she excelled not only in music but also in art and literature. Sophia had a rare artistic sensitivity, an ability to express emotions through art that impressed everyone around her. But there was another child who needed attention. Lucas, Richard's son with Jessica. With Jessica having moved away and Richard completely broken, the boy found himself in a delicate situation. That's when Marina made a decision that surprised even Thomas. "I want to help Lucas," she told her brother one night over dinner. "He's not to blame for any of this. He's just a child." "Marina, are you sure after everything?" "I am, because if I don't, I'll become what they were. I'll let a child suffer for the mistakes of adults, and I don't want that." With a court order and Jessica's consent, Marina began to play an active role in Lucas's life, not as a mother, but as a supportive figure. She paid for the boy's therapy, ensured he had access to a good education, and most importantly, showed him that not everything in the world was selfishness and cruelty. Lucas and Sophia met at a carefully planned gathering. It was awkward at first, two children who were half-siblings but had grown up in completely different worlds, but slowly they developed a genuine friendship. Sophia, with her gentle nature, helped Lucas cope with the confusion and pain he felt, and Lucas, in turn, showed Sophia that forgiveness and compassion were possible even in the most complicated situations. Marina's life was completely transformed. From a humiliated and broken woman, she became the chairwoman of the Phoenix Institute, a powerful voice in the fight for women's rights, and a present, loving mother. But recognition came in an unexpected way. Marina was invited to speak at an international conference on resilience and female leadership in Geneva. It was a prestigious event, attended by world leaders, influential businesswomen, and renowned activists. Marina initially hesitated, but Thomas and Sophia encouraged her. "You have to tell your story, Mommy," said Sophia, now 7, hugging her mother, "so other people know it's possible to start over." On the day of the speech, Marina walked onto the stage wearing a simple yet elegant dress, her hair down, no ostentatious jewelry. She looked out at the packed audience and took a deep breath. "My name is Marina," she began, "and for a long time I believed my story was over. I believed I was just a victim, destined to carry my pain forever. But I learned something fundamental. Our stories don't end when we fall, they just find a new chapter." She told them everything. The manipulation, the loss, the humiliation, the miraculous reunion with Sophia, the rebuilding. Her voice was firm, emotional, but controlled, and when she finished, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. The video of her speech went viral on social media. Millions of views, thousands of comments from women thanking her for sharing a story that inspired them not to give up on their own struggles. Marina had unintentionally become a symbol of hope. Back in New York, life went on. Sophia represented the United States at a children's music festival in Argentina, where she won first place. Marina was in the audience, crying with pride, as her daughter sang with the same crystalline voice that had led her to her that night at the Avalon Hotel. Lucas, now in regular therapy and living with his mother upstate, visited New York monthly. He and Sophia had become inseparable during these visits. Marina saw in them the proof that love could transcend the most difficult circumstances. One day, while walking with Sophia and Lucas through the headquarters of the Phoenix Institute, the little girl stopped in front of a plaque Marina had placed at the entrance. It was a simple but powerful phrase. "Not everything that seems lost is truly gone." "Mommy," Sophia asked, "what's a miracle?" Marina knelt to her daughter's level and smiled. "A miracle, my love, is something that finds us when all seems lost. But in reality, it was with us all along. It just needed the right moment to be revealed." Sophia hugged her mother tightly, and Lucas shyly came closer and joined the hug. Marina closed her eyes, feeling the presence of the 2 children, and silently gave thanks for having survived hell to live in this heaven. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, painful memories, scars that would never completely fade. But Marina had learned that living wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about finding meaning in it, about transforming darkness into light, about proving that human resilience is stronger than any cruelty. And there, in that embrace with her children, Marina knew she had found not just a second chance, but a reason to believe that tomorrow could always be better than yesterday. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marina and Sophia has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, resilience, and rebirth, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and the extraordinary capacity we have to start over, even when all seems lost. We'll see you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions.